Hey guys, welcome back to DASKA Discusses. That's right, today I'm going to be discussing one of my favourite horror films of all time. Yep, I'm talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. Directed by Wes Craven, 1984. The reason why I'm discussing this today was because I was going through my DVD collection. Yes, we all know DVDs are, well, they're not stagnant in terms of sales, but I was having a look and I'm like, whoa, hang on, I found my old Nightmare on Elm Street DVD set here that I've got. You open it up and it's basically got, it had all the discs in there from number 1 to Freddy's Dead, and I'm like, you know what? It's time to do a review on one of my favourite horror films, so let's start this off, shall we? Now, the thing is with A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 is that I've got fond memories of it. Now, maybe you think this is a bit disturbing, but I remember, it came out in 1984. I remember watching this as a kid, vaguely remember something. I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, yeah. Back then, censorship wasn't a big deal with parents, but I remember vaguely seeing it at that age, but I remember properly seeing it at probably, I'd say, 10, 11 years old. Now you gotta remember, I think my threshold for being scared was pretty high at that age, and I remember vividly seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street at a really young age, and something stuck with me. It was kind of like, I think it was the birth of my love for horror films came from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. Now the thing is with Wes Craven, he made a few of his films like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, but I never seen them when I was a kid. But A Nightmare on Elm Street was a whole different ballgame. The thing is with the story, the premise is you got a whole bunch of friends who, or one of them in particular, at the start of the film, keeps having all these weird dreams that someone is chasing her, some guy with knives for fingers. And then she talks to her friend Nancy, played by Heather Langenkamp, who's like, hang on, I had the same kind of dream. And then you got Johnny Depp there, who makes his first film introduction, to the film industry in this as well. And they've got some kind of they're all catching up, and then kind of not a sleepover, but Nancy's helping her friend Tina, who's scared about what's happening. Then Rod, Tina's boyfriend, rocks up. And then one by one throughout the film, spoilers obviously, one by one throughout the film, Tina, what seems to be the protagonist of the film, is killed off in the first 15-20 minutes of the film. Very Hitchcockian of Wes Craven, I must say, having this key character that you see in the opening shots of the film and then killed off like that in a really brutal fashion as well. Let's talk about the acting in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now the thing is, you'd say that Heather Langenkamp gets a lot of flack for being not a good actress in this film. I think she does an okay job. I haven't seen her in other films per se, but out of all of them, yeah, you could say maybe she's the weakest one. I think Johnny Depp's character and Johnny Depp, the way his acting performance is really top notch and it's really naturalistic. John Saxon does a great job as Nancy's father, does a real good job. Nancy's mum, on the other hand, again, her and Nancy are very similar in terms of, I don't really believe their roles, if that makes sense. But Nancy is a really good protagonist in the film. She plays this role really well. Now let's talk about Freddy, played by Robert Englund. You can look at a lot of films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Friday the 13th. You can look at all of them and think, oh yeah, cool, they're scary films, The originals are always the best and the sequels were not that good, you could say in some cases. But you can't really put you literally can't put a face to Michael Myers, Leatherface, or Jason Voorhees because they've always got these masks on. Sometimes they get knocked off, yes, we all know. But again, they don't talk much, if anything at all. The thing is with Freddy Krueger especially, you got Robert Englund who brings so much to the role. Now in this film, specifically Part 1, it didn't go down, it was the original one, it was more horror based. There wasn't a lot of gags in it. As all the sequels came about with Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street, they tend to get more into the whole horror comedy slash kind of slasher film, and you find that Freddy ends up having more of a personality and he ends up there's a lot of gags in the further sequels, whereas with this one, it's not pure horror, it is a scary film, I think, and Robert Englund brings so much to it. The whole fact that he looks like some sort of dirty kind of hobo with this, the hat and the sweater, and it's just really grimy, brings a lot to it, and his voice, everything he does in it is done really well. But in terms of Freddy Krueger, in terms of that character himself, It's a well-known pop culture character that will forever be remembered as a key slasher film of the 80s, okay? So you got Mike Myers, you've got Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, but Freddy Krueger up there, it was huge, okay? Now going back to the story for a second, in terms of like Freddy Krueger and who he is, they say he's a child murderer, but the whole premise of him killing you in your dreams makes this really, really creepy, in fact. Now, obviously Michael Myers and Jason, they're all scary in their own right, but Freddy, on the other hand, it's not in this kind of realm. It's in this dream kind of landscape where anything can happen, and a lot of stuff does happen. And that leads me to some of the brutal kills in this film. But before we get into the kills, let's talk about my favorite or my creepiest parts, okay? Now, number one, I think, well, I'm not putting in no particular order, but when Tina wakes up, we know, when she's in bed there with Ryden, she kind of like hears this rock getting thrown at a window, and she gets up and she walks over to the window, and you hear Freddy Krueger say that whole Tina. I remember that vividly. Like that scene there sticks in me. There's something really creepy about just her standing at the window, hearing this voice, looking down, and she knows that something's down there. So what does she do? She goes down into the alleyway, and she walks through into this alley, and she hears her name being called again. You've got this this rubbish bin lid which is rolling her on the floor, and then she turns around and sees Freddy's shadow. Freddy comes out to her, and he's got these outstretched arms. It looks pretty tacky, but the effect is done really well. Then there's this whole chase scene with Tina, and then, well, one of the most brutal kills in a horror film where Tina's basically in bed there with Rod. Rod wakes up and he's freaking out, and he sees Tina like basically asleep having a nightmare, and then Freddy kills her. Now the thing is with this, it's quite brutal, and I remember as a kid seeing this. I mean, there was the uncut version on VHS that you could borrow from the video shop, but I remember on TV they always cut out the main gruesome parts with the blood splurting everywhere. Now seeing the uncut version, then it didn't give me nightmares, but yeah, it is a quite graphic scene. Now the way she gets dragged up the wall as well, and how they filmed that, if you've seen the making of it, it's quite amazing with the rotating room, what they did as well. For the 80s, I reckon that effect is awesome, and Tina's death in the film is definitely one of the most memorable deaths you can say in any horror film. I'd say, that's my opinion anyway. Following on from that, another really creepy part that I found was when Nancy's in school, and obviously all the bad stuff's happened, 2 nights before or the night before. She goes there, she falls asleep in class, while there's this random student who's, I think he's reciting Macbeth or Shakespeare, I'm actually not sure what it is, but he's sitting there reading it, and then she falls asleep, and then she hears Tina's voice, and she turns, and then there's Nancy in a body bag there, calling out to her, which, again, that imagery as a kid stuck with me. Really creepy part. But I think the whole thing of the guy reading this Shakespeare thing out, juxtaposed with what you see, for some reason, that guy and the way he whispers the last lines of what he's saying, having bad dreams or something like that, really stuck with me, and it's a really creepy scene. Fun fact though, Lynn Shay, who was in Insidious, is the teacher in that scene as well, and she's the sister of the producer of the film as well, which is pretty cool. Another real creepy part that I found is Glenn's death, so Johnny Depp's character, where he's watching TV in his bed, and then all of a sudden, he falls asleep, and this arm comes out of his bed, drags him down into the bed, and then the bed kind of turns into this giant kind of like fountain of blood, which is obviously, it's a fantasy horror film, so it's a bit far-fetched because no one's got that much blood, but just that whole thing of being dragged into your bed and then that happening, the imagery in that's fantastic, and again, it's really well shot and well made. Now let's talk about my favorite parts of Nightmare on Elm Street. Now my favorite parts of Nightmare on Elm Street have got to be, one of them which I think really works well, is when Nancy's mum gives Nancy the backstory to Freddy, okay? And she tells her exactly what happened and how they got revenge and how they actually killed him because it was a child murder. And then she pulls out the gloves, and then this music, the soundtrack kicks in, and it just gives you this eerie kind of feel. That's one of my favorite parts. I don't know why, I really enjoy that part there. I think that scene really does work well, and there's something stuck with me. It was just that whole backstory of, we're not given too much info, but we're given enough to know that Freddy is an evil character. Another one of my favorite parts is when Nancy sees that body bag in the school, and then she runs into the hall monitor or whatever it is, and she's like, "Where's your pass? You know, screw your pass." And then she turns around and that hall monitor's got the glove, and she's like, "Hey Nancy, no running in the hallway." And then that laugh, and then the leaves come in. It's just, you know that she's in a dream. I really like that whole sequence where you've got how Freddy's kind of like morphed into this hall monitor with the blood down her face, and then that imagery of her looking, and then it's like dark with all these leaves. It's fantastic. You know you're in a dream. That's the good thing about this film, is that yes, you've got the real world, but then in the dreamland, anything can happen. And I reckon my favorite scene of the film, I think it's got to be, well, not just the scene, but the soundtrack of A Nightmare on Elm Street is fantastic. That whole theme, you know what it is, that dun 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 dun, that, and how they repeated that throughout the series. But that, you know, well, we know that Halloween and Friday the 13th, they got their iconic themes, but the Nightmare on Elm Street theme is, I think, up there as one of the best horror themes out there. And the way it's used in that opening scene, I'm talking about the one where you see just these grimy hands, someone's trying to like fix some sort of like glove. You see Freddy actually making his glove. Now, when was he actually making this glove? Is it in the past? Is it the present? Is it a nightmare? We don't know what it is, but I really love that opening scene where you see Freddy putting together this glove, and then he opens it up, and then bah, he's got that whole thing where it turns, and then the titles come up, and it's just an epic opening scene. Another one of my least favorite parts has got to be the ending, in terms of the way it ends, the way, you know, Nancy and the mum, you know, everything's all happy after all this bad stuff's happened. Has it been a dream? Has it not been a dream? And then she goes off with their friends, you know, the car, the convertible comes down, and it's got Freddy's colors on the roof, which is pretty cool. But then the way the mum gets ripped through the door, and you know, if you've seen the extra features, you'll know that the producers, I think Robert Shea put that in there as like a kind of like a cliffhanger or like a punch kind of ending to say, yeah, there could be a sequel. But she gets ripped through this door, which again, I find it a bit cheesy and tacky in my opinion. Now, in summing up A Nightmare on Elm Street, there is just the fact that I think it's just an iconic film of the 80s, an iconic slasher film. It introduced the world to Freddy Krueger, introduced the world to a lot of concepts in terms of like dreams in films, okay? But also the fact that, well, one, the soundtrack's amazing, the acting was okay, yeah, it was the 80s, it was a lot different. The body count's not that big in this compared to other horror films. The premise of that you can get killed in your nightmares is scary as well. A lot of iconic imagery, but also things like, you know, the nursery rhyme, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, 3, 4, better lock your door, all that as well. They're iconic with pop culture, horror films, and the remake. I'm not even going to talk about the remake, maybe another day, a long time from now I'll talk about the remake, but just want to say that Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1 is an iconic 80s film, an iconic horror film, and I think it should be remembered as, and it will be remembered as, one of the greatest horror films that came out of the 80s and introduced us to Freddy Krueger. In summing up, what am I going to give A Nightmare on Elm Street out of 10? Look, as a kid, I would have given it a 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10 because I loved it so much. Looking back on it now, yes, it does have it's got its negatives, it's also got a lot of positives, so in terms of where it stands, I'll have to give it probably an 8.5 out of 10. Yep, 8.5 out of 10 for me for Nightmare on Elm Street. Where does it lose its points? Loses points on the fact that sometimes the storyline just tends to like kind of like plateau a bit in the middle of the film, where we're kind of like repeated the same kind of stuff about how everyone's having the bad dreams and not much is happening during the middle of the film. It kind of loses it there, and just some of the acting might be a bit subpar, but more so that. But 8.5 is an excellent score, 85% out of 100, fantastic. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you want to comment, let me know what you thought of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, and if you were as scared as I was as a kid, please let me know in the comments. And if you want to keep up to date with all my films, and subscribe if you want, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be up to date with all my videos, and I'll see you guys on the next time on DASKA Discusses. Boom!